Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to True Crime with the Sarge. I'm your host, Joseph Giacalone. If you're watching this live today, thank you very much. If you're watching this on Kick, thank you also. Ashley, I have to say thank you right off the bat. Just gifted 10 memberships. I'm in awe. Thank you so much for your generosity and support. I really appreciate that. Today, we have an awesome guest. All right, we have an awesome guest. The topic is very difficult, right? We're going to be talking about some human trafficking, and we're going to be talking about some serious adult things. So just be mindful. This is not for children. This is for adults. This is what people are interested in, and maybe we can figure out what we can do about it, or just, in fact, just let everybody know and keep people informed about what's going on and what is happening, and maybe, like I said, get our politicians involved and everything like that. So, without further ado, I'm going to bring in our guest. And here is Dr. Francine Bono-Neri, right? So we're gonna give you that little Italian version of it. But listen, her credentials are off the charts. She's a registered nurse. She's a PhD. She's a pediatric nurse practitioner. She's on the board of American Nurse Association, co-founder and president of Nurses Against Human Trafficking, which we're going to talk about. And we're also going to talk about a training program that she's going to offer everybody a discount for today. And she's a published author. There's a lot more to Dr. Bono-Neri, but Francine, thanks for joining us. We had to cut that bio a little short.
Hi, Joe. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, anytime. I know. Listen, I'm glad Mike got me in touch with you, because this is a underserved topic for sure about what's happening here in the United States and elsewhere. But we're gonna stick to the United States pretty much in regards to what's exactly happening. And there has been a lot of talk about human trafficking lately in the United States. Can you tell us what's the definition? Like, how do we make sure that we even know what we're talking about?
Absolutely. And I really appreciate that you're recognizing that there is a lot of buzz about human trafficking. The movie that came out, Sound of Freedom, recently, although that really isn't portraying what's happening here domestically, does happen in that form in other countries. But just to give you the true definition of human trafficking, according to the TVPA, which is the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, and I always like to read the definition so that I have the accurate definition with all of the terms. So there's sex trafficking, which is the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, obtaining, patronizing, or soliciting of a person for the purpose of a commercial sex act, in which a commercial sex act is induced by force, fraud, or coercion, or in which the person induced to perform such act has not attained 18 years of age. And that's very important. Anyone under the age of 18, according to federal law, if they are involved in a commercial sex act, it is human trafficking, it's a crime, and it falls under mandatory reporting guidelines. Forced labor is the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for labor or services through the use of force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of subjection to involuntary servitude, peonage, debt bondage, or slavery. And, there's human smuggling, and a lot of people think that these terms are interchangeable, and they are not. Human trafficking is specifically an exploitation-based crime against an individual, whereas smuggling is actually a transportation-based crime against a country. And so smuggling is defined as the importation of people across a country's border involving deliberate evasion of immigration laws. Now, there are times where we have people who are smuggled in, that they are coming in, they're being promised a better life. And some of those scenarios actually can turn to trafficking, because now they find themselves in debt bondage. And so they have to work off that fee that they were quoted for, so to speak, to get into the country. And now they're finding themselves in this position.
Right. So I am in no way any expert on this subject. So I did some research before we had the show today, because I wanted to learn more about it and to be able to, when you're talking about it, and listen exactly what happens. There's all kinds of show notes today's, guys, in the on the YouTube channel here. You can find out more about Francine, and of course about this subject. So I was reading this article, and it said basically we're looking at these people make about $150 billion a year on this. I mean, it's craziness.
And honestly, Joe, those numbers are based on older metrics. They're saying that it's approximately 240 billion now annually.
Jeez.
And that's tax-free money. off of the profits of human cargo. Now, please also note that unlike a drug, unlike an illicit arms deal or trade, once that product is gone, once that drug is inhaled or smoked or injected, it's gone. But a human being can be sold over and over and over again. And this is where the complex trauma comes in. This is where the acute and chronic healthcare conditions come in. The crimes against these individuals are heinous, egregious acts that are being performed against these people. It is truly a humanitarian crisis.
It's actually a public health crisis, right? I mean, it's a whole world crisis, but it gets very little media attention, or every now and then you might hear it, or you hear a police department create a unit to help combat it, but you never really hear anything that's kind of concrete, what they're doing about it.
Well, you know what? That's actually a really good point. First and foremost, people don't really recognize human trafficking. They don't know what it is because these individuals, unlike that movie Taken or again Sound of Freedom, these individuals are not necessarily taken and abducted. They are psychologically manipulated, and they don't even self-identify as victims. Like in numerous professions, I mean, across the board, unfortunately, all professions really do not know how to identify it. They don't know how to recognize it. And that's part of the reason why these numbers truly are underrepresented, because we are not seeing it. So we are not identifying it to increase those metrics that are out there.
Right, so the scope of this problem is actually much bigger, probably 2 or 3 times as bad as they're even telling us, because they don't even know in their own defense, right? They're not making up numbers. They really have no idea.
100%. The scope is massive. According to the ILO in 2022, there are approximately 50 million people that are held in this form of modern day slavery. And again, those numbers are underrepresented.
So as we're still talking about this topic now, what are some of the myths that we have that we can maybe put to rest finally about this subject?
Yes, that's a great question. One of the first things that I want to address is that there is polycriminalization. Human trafficking is not a sole criminal enterprise. We have the drug trade. We have illicit drug arms deals. We have terrorism, these cryptocurrencies. All of these criminal enterprises actually fuel and finance each other. So human trafficking is not its own separate entity. One of the other myths, people feel that only girls or women are trafficked, and sex trafficking is the only form of trafficking. There's labor trafficking, and these don't necessarily need to happen in these underground or illegal types of operations. They're actually happening in the agricultural industries, crabbing industries, fishing industries, those traveling sales crews, healthcare. There's, of course, again, sex trafficking. There's domestic servitude. There's organ trafficking, where organs are sold on the black market. So again, there are a number of forms of trafficking, and it's not just sex trafficking, which is most commonly known. Women and girls, again, I'm sorry, go ahead, Joe.
No,
what were you gonna say?
yeah, I just want to, sorry to interrupt you there, but
No.
so when we always hear this about, well, it's a cheap labor force, we have all these migrants coming in, and they do the jobs that quote unquote Americans don't want to do, but we might be partaking in something really heinous here.
100%, 100%. And it's very important to also know where the products we are purchasing are coming from. Some of them actually may be at the hands of these individuals who are being labor trafficked. And that's another way of cutting down on the supply and demand. But just getting back to some of the other myths, and that was a great point. Thank you for mentioning that. People think that only women and girls are sex trafficked, and that is not the case. We have males that are trafficked, boys that are trafficked, and even the traffickers. A lot of that stereotype is that it's a male, older, domineering figure. We actually have female traffickers, and we have traffickers that are actually parents, that there's familial sex trafficking. Another myth is that it's not happening in my area. It's not happening in my neighborhood. surprise, it is. It's happening in schools as well. There are kids who are actually recruiting kids out of school, and they are being trafficked. A lot of people think that it is these individuals who are being trafficked are these undocumented foreign-born nationals. Nope. It's happening to our own citizens. It is happening in our backyards. It is happening again in communities. It is so incredibly prolific, and people really are not recognizing the scope. And so I really thank you for bringing this topic to the front lines here, so that your viewers can really become much more informed, and with some of the takeaways that we do through the show, hopefully they'll be able to identify and recognize and sort of take action and next steps.
Yeah, no, this is actually very enlightening. But is there a specific age group? I know it can involve any ages and, like you said, any genders, but is there a specific age group, or it depends on the type of trafficking, I guess? Is there something they could zone on and say, well, this cohort is the largest of the group that is trafficked?
That's a great question. So I will tell you that the average age of an individual in the commercial sex trade is actually about 13 to 16.
Wow.
We've actually seen younger. It does depend. I really shouldn't even say that, because all cases are unique. There is no prejudice or bias as to who gets recruited into the life. It crosses all demographics, all socioeconomic statuses. There are no geographical boundaries, particularly now because of the digital communication, social media platforms, gaming apps. Please, if there are parents listening, Roblox, Minecraft, these apps, these gaming apps, kids are being recruited. They are being groomed. These predators are taking them to a separate chat. You think that your child is safe, that they're upstairs or, in the next room playing. They are not. Anytime there are children present, you will find predators. And, this has become the new white van. Remember, Joe, as we were growing up, we had a fear of the
free
white
candy.
van.
Yeah, free candy.
This is it, because you know what? There are no geographical boundaries. Everyone is online, particularly after COVID. We had kids who were maintaining their academic progression. Everyone transitioned to this online continuation of work, continuation of school, and we've really stayed there. And so these traffickers, these master manipulators are literally harnessing this, and they are profiting exponentially because of it. Years ago, back in the 70s or whatever, there were like those street corners, the red light districts. We have virtual street corners now. We have these individuals that are being promoted online, that there are these, these apps now where you can meet and buy sex. And it's all part of that trafficking ring.
Yeah, that's craziness. Especially you hear about the games. Like I said, most parents say, well, my kid's upstairs playing games. Everything's cool, right? I mean, you don't have to worry about them, but you got to check in on them, I guess, and see what they're up to and see who they're talking to.
Yes. In fact, I have a couple of really scary statistics for you.
Okay.
10 is the average age that a child gets a device. 18 is the number of minutes that it takes them to meet a online friend in person, and 32 million is the number of cyber tips called into NCMEC, which is the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, into their cyber tip line for sexual exploitation. Right. So, yeah, I mean,
so this gives the whole missing persons and these missing kids things a whole other avenue that you look at it and say, well, the kid, because listen, just from the formal law enforcement perspective, right? You get these kids back in the day, they probably went to go hang out with their friends and this. But now it's like what you're telling us, it's like it could be a much more nefarious than just that they went to go meet their boyfriend or girlfriend.
Absolutely. And you know what? That is a vulnerability, is homelessness and these runaway youth. Law enforcement, they have these kids that keep running away. They keep bringing them back, never really recognizing or stopping to say to them, well, What are you running from? Perhaps there's actually abuse going on in the home, or what are you running to? Someone may be promising them a better life. And until we stop and ask these questions, these kids literally are falling under our radar. But actually, couch surfing, homelessness, juvenile justice system, child welfare system, all of these are vulnerabilities and really those red flag indicators that a child could be trafficked.
Wow. So, I mean, we know the reasons kind of why you got involved in this whole anti movement, but just could you just tell us exactly how you and the organization Nurses United Against Human Trafficking takes a role in try to combat this?
Yes, absolutely. And so I will tell you briefly the way that I got into the anti trafficking space was because I recognized about 8 months after the fact that I failed as a mandated reporter. Working in the fields of pediatrics, my entire career, I've been a nurse now for over 30 years, but it was as recent as the fall of 2018. I was working as a clinical instructor. And so I had taken 8 of my nursing students into the clinical facility for their pediatric rotation. And so we were in a facility in New York, large teaching facility, level 1 trauma center. And we had this 16-year-old who was to be admitted to the floor. So I had one of my students help the nurse who was taking the admission. I said, it's a great learning experience. And there were a few other students who weren't busy. I said, come on, let's go in and, just to see what we can do. And again, a great observation. And there was this 16-year-old, and I could not believe the condition of her. And, again, red flag, signs and symptoms, clinical presentations. She had lice. She was malnourished, covered in IV drug marks, sexually transmitted infection, positive urine for polysubstances. And there was this domineering male figure who wouldn't leave the room. And I knew something was wrong. I just didn't know what it was. Following year, I was in Washington, D.C. We were there for a membership assembly for the American Nurses Association, as I was on the board of directors for the state of New York, and who is now my dear colleague and co-founder, Tammy Tony Butler, was up there presenting on human trafficking. And she's going on about the signs and symptoms and the red flags and a domineering male figure. And all of a sudden, Joe, I was hit by an 18-wheeler in the middle of membership assembly. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, that you literally just described that 16-year-old. And so very fortuitously, I actually ran into her in the lobby after the presentation, and I stopped her. I said, please, I need to talk to you because what you described is literally what happened to me. And so I started to go into some of the details, and she said, absolutely, she was being trafficked. And her trafficker was sitting right there. And so I handed her my business card. I said, listen, I don't know how to help you, but please let me help you. And that literally was the birth of Nurses United Against Human Trafficking. And so what we do is we are dedicated to abolishing this form of modern day slavery by educating, equipping, and empowering particularly healthcare professionals. But we do have a law enforcement perspective. We have a subject matter expert by the name of Detective Randy Snyder, who is out of Pinal County in Arizona. He worked ICAC, which I'm sure a lot of your listeners are aware of that acronym, but if not, it's Internet Crimes Against Children. He worked ICAC for 10 years, over, I don't know, it's like 33 states or 36 states and 3 countries, or over 8 countries, over 3 continents, incredibly well-versed. And he actually has developed a law enforcement perspective of human trafficking and exploitation. And so it's really a matter of properly educating numerous disciplines, judicial branch, healthcare professionals, ranging from nurses, physicians, social work, radiology technologists, because when we look at human trafficking and the heinous acts that are being performed against these individuals, it sets them up for these acute, emergent healthcare concerns, chronic issues. They're coming in with near overdoses. The healthcare professionals are not identifying it because they're not properly trained. And there have been studies conducted even 10, 11 years ago where they're saying, and I'll get to that in a second, but saying that retrospectively survivors were interviewed and surveyed. between 70 to 90% of these survivors reported having accessed health care during their trafficking life, and most of them were missed. And just,
Wow.
as I was chuckling, my colleague and I, Tammy Tony Butler, we just recently published a study that we did that was nationwide, looking at pre-licensure RN nursing students and their level of knowledge and exposure to human trafficking content in that pre-licensure RN program. Our findings were consistent with studies that were done 10 years ago of licensed healthcare professionals. Over 90% of our sample size of our participants reported minimal to no human trafficking content being taught. 80% reported some to zero knowledge on human trafficking. Less than 1% reported full confidence in being able to identify those signs and symptoms, red flags, clinical presentations. Again, just like I had missed it after being a nurse for 27, 28 years. And less than 5% reported full confidence in being able to actually intervene and treat this population. And, when we look at healthcare professionals, currently, only about 10 states mandate continuing education for healthcare professionals on anti-trafficking training. So we know that RNs are not getting it. There have been a few select studies looking at different disciplines, particularly medicine. Again, not getting it. But when we look at this problem, the nurses in particular, there are over 4 million of us working across the country. We comprise the largest portion of the healthcare professions. So if we are not properly educated, right, we're not getting a pre-licensure in our program, in our training, our education, and only 10 states mandate it, we're not getting it at all. And so literally this population coming in upward of 70 to 90% reporting that they've accessed healthcare, they're coming in, they're being seen, but they are completely invisible to us.
And I can guarantee you the law enforcement aspect on that is even worse than that. If we're not getting this kind of training in the medical field, we're certainly not getting it in law enforcement. I mean, I did over 20 years and we never mentioned it in anything that you did. I mean, every now and then you'd walk into a scene and say something's not right, but you just couldn't put your finger on it.
Right.
And a lot of different things you just say, well, it was about this or that, the other thing. But it's something that needs to be discussed and it needs to be put out in the mainstream. Like I said, I'm a little upset in the respect that this is not happening, right? Here we are, 2023, and we're finding out all these holes in the system, and nothing's getting plugged.
Let me tell you, when you talk about holes in the system, Joe, it is beyond plugging the holes. We have to just tear down the dam and rebuild it. There are too many fractures, too many broken pieces in the system to fix. It just needs to be completely revamped. And, I'm so glad that you addressed the law enforcement perspective, because they are literally, members of the service of law enforcement are seeing them. They're not identifying them. Again, the homelessness, those runaway youth, those traffic stops, you have these people that they're not in possession of their government issued ID. That's why actually one of the signs and symptoms, or I should say the red flags, having monikers, these traffickers like to brand their victims. So monikers in dollar signs, crowns, roses, names, initials, Big Daddy, that kind of thing. Also the victims are literally being so brainwashed that their trafficker is putting the fear of God into them if they report anything to law enforcement. So they either become incredibly demure, they make no eye contact, or they go to the other side of the spectrum, that they really are combative and they're fighting you. And so here that member of service is thinking, oh my gosh, who is this person? Obviously, this is, going to be a pain in the neck for me today, not recognizing what's truly happening. Because even that victim does not self-identify as a victim. They are so psychologically manipulated, they don't even see it in themselves.
If you're just joining us now, we have Dr. Francine Bono-Neri. She is a forensic nurse and a pediatric nurse practitioner, and we're discussing the very difficult topic of human trafficking. And just to break the levity for a moment, both of us talking with our hands. I don't know if they're going to be able to have subtitles on hand gestures, but maybe they should. Right, between you and me, we're gonna be conducting the band soon. We're gonna be conducting the band soon. But what are some of the other what are some of the other red flags or signals that we should be looking for? You had mentioned about no eye contact, no government identification. What else?
Yes, absolutely. Multiple cell phones, multiple hotel keys, being in possession of large amounts of cash, multiple bruising in different stages of healing, not making eye contact. Those monikers are very, very big, very big. Being dressed inappropriately, particularly for the time of year, having stories that seem scripted, having someone who is either doing all the speaking for someone or is insisting on translating for that person. Those victims not really knowing where they are. So again, it's not like the movie Taken where they are abducted and then they're kidnapped, but they can be moved from state to state, area to area. And so they truly don't know where they are. They sort of lose track of time, lose track of day. But then again, we also have those that are on public transportation, who are going to work, who are coming into our ERs, our clinics. And again, with that lack of self-identifying as a victim, they don't see it. And so it is up to us as healthcare professionals, as members of law enforcement, to be properly educated, to see beyond that layer and really start to take a deeper dive and say what's happening. Anyone who has any type of substance use or addiction to substances, we have to think human trafficking, because sometimes that substance, for numerous reasons. So let me start with the first. That could have been a vulnerability that made them fall prey to a trafficker. That trafficker says, listen, I know you need it. Don't worry. Here's your fix. I got you. I'm going to take care of you. And eventually that trafficker holds that substance, that addiction, over that victim and says, hey, listen, you go service your X number of Johns for the day, and then I'll give you your fix. Or it is also a way of keeping them in this altered level of consciousness so that they can be poor historians. Or it is really that coping mechanism that this individual can no longer take a second in the life, and so they are using. And so anyone who comes in with a history of substance use or has a near overdose, we have to think human trafficking. And, just like you were saying, that not being properly educated, we're thinking something else. That's literally what's happening. We are overshadowing what they are showing us, what they are presenting us as, like that 16-year-old. We thought that she was this promiscuous, drug-using youth, failing to recognize what was truly happening. And so we are overshadowing them, stereotyping them, having our biases, and not really seeing what's happening. And, we have these victims that are participating in these criminal activities. They're being arrested. They're getting these criminal records. In the meantime, they literally are the victim. They are being manipulated. They are being coerced. They are being threatened. These individuals have received beatings. I mean, just horrific. They're threatening their families. They're threatening their children. They say, listen, you go do what I tell you to do, or else I'm going to start trafficking out your kid. I mean, it is the purest form of evil that there is, Joe.
Wow. And you said something before that kind of tipped me off. It would be a great law enforcement tip. You stop somebody or you arrest somebody, and this person has multiple hotel keys, right? I mean, all those plastic cards, and and that's a question, or that's something that's a red flag right there.
That is absolutely correct. That is absolutely correct.
And I know hotels have the signs. I mean, I was just one not too long ago when I was down in Florida for the Crime Con, and there's signs all over the Marriott, about human trafficking, and if you suspect it, they don't really tell you what to look for, but they just tell you they just said, be aware. I'm like, okay, be aware.
Yeah. And what I went through really is just sort of the tip of the iceberg. I would truly love for any of your viewers to come to our website. It's www.nuaht.org. And there we have our learning management system. We have these downloadable flyers that have different tips and signs and symptoms. And again, offering that 25% discount code for anyone who is interested in either that law enforcement module a la carte or is interested in taking our entire training. We have modules 101 through 104, as well as 6 different case studies. And again, that law enforcement piece, that's the entire NUAHT anti-trafficking training curriculum. And then, like I said, we have the law enforcement piece that's sold a la carte.
Right. And I'm just putting it into the chat now, and I'm putting in the code Sarge 2023 for the discount if you're interested in taking that. Listen, you can't go wrong by educating ourselves and looking into some more of these things, because you might come up with ideas and you might think things pop up, like I heard, just like the cards that you look for. Is there anything else that do you have any other tip besides that for law enforcement specifically to look for when they come across somebody, maybe in a car stop or in a domestic dispute, maybe, or something that happened?
Yes, I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because again, they can be presenting as a domestic violence. They're coming in intimate partner violence. Please have human trafficking on the radar, because again, that victim is seeing that trafficker as their spouse, their boyfriend, their girlfriend, their parent. They literally, they can be their parents, because there is familial sex trafficking. Again, recognizing that you may not necessarily have an incorrigible individual because they're incorrigible, but because they actually are fearful because they've been manipulated that way. I'm trying to think what else. Again, if they're not in possession of their government issue ID, of course, developmentally appropriate and age appropriate. Those who really are very fearful because they are threatened. They say that if you report, you're the one who's going to be arrested. You're the one who's going to get in trouble. Predominantly, there is someone who is very domineering. Again, please don't have that stereotype that it's either male or female. I'm trying to think what else. Again, those multiple hotel keys, multiple cell phones, not being able to speak for themselves, having someone translate, particularly if there is a language barrier, not feeling free to discuss what they're doing or the type of work that they're doing, can be reserved, making no eye contact, or again, as I said, can be completely on the opposite side of the spectrum, that they are off the charts and they really are very combative and fighting tooth and nail.
Well, you're definitely garnering some fans out here, and actually getting people encouraged to do something. So Shay writes, Dr. Bono-Neri is making me want to get into the nursing field. My friend has been trying to convince me, but my own childhood trauma stops me. Do you have any quick advice for Shay in regards to that?
I'm sorry. Oh, Dr. Bono's making me. My friend has come. Joe, I thought I misunderstood. I thought it was you that was saying it. I was like, come on, Joe.
Well, sure. Is Charlotte? Yeah, Charlotte says, I'm applauding Dr. Francine with a brilliant orator. Yep.
Thank you so much.
This is exactly what we need, and we need to have more good qualified people, because I know nursing is a great field to get into, and they're struggling to hire nurses.
So that's a whole nother problem. When I said that this is really like the dam is just caving in, because we also have healthcare professional shortages that are really going to be horrendous in the upcoming 10, 15 years. We have hospitals that are closing down. I am a sexual assault nurse examiner. I am a trained sexual assault nurse examiner. I will also say that in our 40-hour training course, there were only 3 slides on human trafficking. So you have SANEs that are not properly educated on human trafficking. And here they are exclusively working with people who are coming in for sexual assault. We only 1 in 5 hospitals have SANEs. So that's another problem. it's so overwhelming when you look at the bigger picture that we just have to take it and break it apart piece by piece to rebuild that dam that is too many holes are leaking at this point.
Well, I mean, what's really concerning, like I said, I know there's, and you just mentioned it too, about the nursing shortage. And in law enforcement, we know that there is a law enforcement shortage too. And situations like this only get worse. They're not going to get better. The bad guys take advantage of actual situations like we're dealing with now. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't get it.
Yeah, they're opportunistic. They're opportunistic, Joe. Absolutely.
So let's talk more. So you're SANE, which is what we also just call for short, like the forensic nurse, right? I mean, that's basically what it is, and there's part of a team too, right? A SART generally. I know in New York, I think we have about 60 hospitals in New York that handle this. Not every hospital does these things, and
that's right.
I don't know if you heard, like New York City Police Department just had another issue with they just happened to find a whole bunch of kits that weren't tested. So we kind of, lack of a better pun, shoot ourselves in the foot here.
Yeah. So just so people understand what a sexual assault nurse examiner is, it is someone who already is a registered nurse or an advanced practice nurse who has a specialized training that works with these survivors of sexual assault who are trauma-informed, trauma-centered, and really that patient-centered approach. We do a comprehensive physical exam. We gather evidence, collecting swabs, taking pictures. We are able to go in. Sometimes we are called in to serve as expert witnesses for cases, to go through our findings and discuss the evidence that we collected and things that were reported. So it is a very specialized part of nursing, one that is not very populated. Unfortunately, but hopefully this may stir some people and, will it pique some interest. And what was it, Shay? Was it Shay?
Shay.
Come on, Shay.
Yep. Yeah, Shay, let's go. We need you out there.
Yes, we do.
In order to be a forensic nurse, how much more education or how much more do you need? Another degree? Do you need to go how much further? Because I think that's a turnoff even for the pathologist, right? When somebody wants to be a forensic pathologist, they have to go to school and do like 2 more years on top of that.
Right. Well, there are different levels. There are some that go specifically for forensic nursing, that it's a master's level program. They also are an NP, a nurse practitioner. And so they specialize in forensics, and that's, crime scene investigations and that kind of stuff. But a sexual assault nurse examiner in particular, there are some states that actually refer to us as forensic nurse examiners, but a SANE per se is a 40-hour course for adults and adolescents. So that would be considered a SANE A once that certification is achieved. For pediatrics, I believe it's an additional, I know it's a little more. I want to say it's 46 hours, 47 hours, don't quote me. And then that person, once certified, would be a SANE P. So it's not the separate degree to become a SANE, but there is this course that you need to take that is highly specialized, learning how to gather evidence, what we need to wet, what is a dry swab, how to take pictures, different lighting that we need to use. And so, but that individual already has to have a nursing license,
right?
A bare minimum of an RN.
It's like being a crime scene tech. You got to know all the different things, the oblique lighting and everything else,
Yes.
and be able to take all those slides and be able to, the kit has, I don't know how many, samples it takes, but there are a lot, and there's a lot of things. And, even procedural wise, they always taught us that when you have a victim, there's no reason for you, the police, to be in the room. It's just between the SANE and the victim. And that's how, because you try not to victimize this person anymore. Sometimes it's even difficult to get the person to come in and do this.
Correct.
Because it's voluntary.
Yes. And so we also have to empower them with choices, empower them with resources. We need to ask permission before we do anything. They are not obligated to call or have us call law enforcement. There are some, again, who are very, very fearful that they actually say, no, you know what? And then they may even stop midway. And that's okay. They have that right to do that. I mean, again, when we look at trauma, the level of trauma that some of these individuals experience is equivalent to that of veterans with PTSD. These crimes, I mean, make the hair on the back of your neck stand. I can't even tell you some of the things that I've seen and some of the things that I've heard, videos, just horrific. And, so what we truly are looking at is trauma that is so profound. And there actually was just a study that was published that those who suffer from trauma, those traumatic experiences, when they think about them, they actually happen in real time again for them. So they literally are being re-victimized. And the downstream effects of trauma, we see early strokes, early heart attacks, diabetes, psychiatric disorders, psychoses. Again, it can stem into food and eating disorders and substance use disorders. And again, that's just another spiral down towards other problems, hypertension and poor lifestyle and shortened lifespan. And we also need to look at adverse childhood experiences, or what's also known as ACE, that acronym ACE. A lot of those who have had prior adverse childhood experiences actually fall at higher rates, or at higher rates of falling prey to a trafficker. So we need to really look at trauma and what it's doing to that individual, not only before, and that's making them more vulnerable to falling prey to a trafficker, but the longer a person is in the life, and I put that in air quotes, meaning the trafficking life, the more downstream effects there are of trauma. According to the most recent statistic that I have found, the average lifespan of an individual here in this country who is being trafficked is 7 years. In Europe, it's actually worse. I believe it's 5.
Yeah,
And
well,
another
I
thing,
mean,
go ahead, Joe. I
I mean, you hear these things and you think about what happens to people, and
Yeah.
then, I always tell people, like, even, I've been out of policing for a long time now, but every now and then you get a flashback and say, whoa, I remember we had something similar to this. Like, now I ask myself, could that have been back then?
Yes.
We need to do something, even if it's a minor training thing, like telling people what those hot button topics are, about what to look for, and what, and how to. The thing is, like, how should law enforcement respond to this? Is there a notification system other than, I know with children you're mandated reporters, so you
Yes.
notify the state registry, but is there any other organization out there? I mean,
yeah, there are a lot of different organizations. A lot of organizations also offer training. In addition to us, we have that one module, but Randy, Detective Snyder, also offers in-person training for anyone who is interested, from members of law enforcement. So please go on our website, contact us. But, you really need to look at local, state, and tribal laws, because a lot of them will differ, that we don't have this uniformity, which again is kind of another problem. But I will tell you, the Department of Homeland Security, they are wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. I have worked with numerous agents from Homeland Security, from the Center for Countering Human Trafficking. They offer amazing resources. They are so incredibly knowledgeable. So please jump on DHS's website. You can Google Blue Campaign. Those are like their resources and their campaign on anti-human trafficking measures. But just to go back to that trauma piece, I want to specifically indicate, because a lot of people, particularly law enforcement members of service, think that some of these people that they are arresting are fabricating their story. Please recognize that trauma, there literally is this hormonal dump that occurs. And there is this biochemical reaction that is truly, that when we look at the neurobiology of trauma, that actually alters their memory. They also have induced, rape-induced paralysis is what is the term that it's called. But because of the trauma, they literally have these sticky notes all over their brain. So no, they're not fabricating their story, and that's why they're poor historians. They literally cannot recount to you in this chronological order what has happened. So please, that's another really hot point that I want to mention. Please, they don't fabricate, they don't make it up unless it's a scripted story and they're trying to cover for their trafficker or their manipulator. They genuinely cannot put together these organized thoughts.
Right. So when people talk about the migrant crisis, other than just the humanitarian crisis that a lot of states and cities are dealing with, because it's in the news every day. We're not making this up, but this opens the door for traffickers. And I hear, certain politicians and groups talk about the trafficking, and then I see the other side say, no, 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 and they try to shut them down. And I'm kind of like, how do we not politicize this? Is craziness. Yeah, I know. Let's make that a rhetorical question. Yeah. I don't want to get into the politics per se, but you say, how does this become a nonpartisan issue? I mean, it's absolute nuttiness. So let's talk about zones of the country where this seems to be more prevalent than others. What are some of the states that should be high alert for some of these issues?
Oh, absolutely. So based on the numbers of calls into the National Human Trafficking Hotline, California is ranked number 1, Texas is number 2, Florida is number 3, and according to what I found, it's New York is number 4. There's also Ohio, which is pretty big.
Really?
We need to, and what's drawing them to these states? First of all, the borders, the proximity to the borders. Second of all, it's the booming economies. So they're being drawn in saying, yes, we can have a better life here. But just when we're talking about the border crisis, and I'm so glad that you mentioned that, it's not only a humanitarian crisis, it is a public health crisis because they are coming in. We don't know their immunization status. They are posing as biological threats to us. And if we learned anything with COVID, right, it's coming in. We don't know how diffusely it's being spread because let's face it, human trafficking didn't stop during the pandemic. Yeah, we were on shutdowns, but believe me, it was still going on. Masks, if they worked, if they didn't work, people were still buying sex. And now we have contact tracing. Do we really think that someone is just going to disclose that they bought sex from a minor or anyone else for that matter? No. And now they're going home to their families. They're bringing it home to their husbands, their wives, their children. I mean, it's a problem on so many different levels. You can't just isolate it and pinpoint and say, well, this is it, and we just have to tackle this. It affects all communities, all societies, and it's just a complex global issue in general.
Right. So when I was looking at the map and looking at where these states are happening, I mean, we can, obviously you said California, Nevada, and, Texas, of course. I mean, we know, and we know, so Las Vegas is like the big problem there, right? Because we know all about what goes on, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, apparently, right? But, in New York, people don't realize that it's a border state still, right? You border Canada, and people come in, people think New York, they hear New York and they think of New York City, that's it. But it's a really big state. And I guess when you think about you think about Ohio, right? You think about Cleveland is right on the lake, and you can still be trafficked from boats. But one of the cities I saw on the list, I was kind of like, Atlanta was on the list, right? So is a hot spot for this. Is they just coming up from Florida? Is it just moving? I mean, how does Atlanta end up on the list? Because you kind of say to yourself, there's really no direct contact with another country. Florida, you can understand why. I mean, you got Cuba and all the other, you can still do by boat. But Atlanta was kind of an interesting little outlier as far as I was concerned.
Yeah, and it's actually not an outlier, to be quite honest. You have to look at, first of all, we have the interstates. They are being moved. Again, I don't want people to think that they're being taken, like that they're being kidnapped. They are being transported. They are being moved. Some don't. So I don't want to have this blanket statement, but interstates, they are moved along the interstate. And we actually in our training have the heat map of Polaris, and Polaris is one of those organizations that is a huge anti-trafficking group, where they actually will track metrics. They have the National Human Trafficking Hotline. And so what I've done was I superimposed the Polaris heat map of the hotspots of trafficking with the map of the country of the interstates. And you can see how they all intersect, particularly where you have those intersections of interstates meeting up. So truck stops, be on the lookout. That's why there's that amazing organization, Truckers Against Trafficking. Highly recommend them. If any one of you is a trucker, please, definitely join them. They have amazing resources available, and you will see them at these truck stops. But please, what is very, very important that I want to say to any of you who is not in law enforcement, please, if you suspect anything, please do not engage. Do not go in and engage. You need to call 911, particularly if there is a safety issue. Just like for us as healthcare professionals, we never want to engage the trafficker. We never want to speak in a negative light to that victim of the trafficker, because that person is psychologically manipulated and feels that he or she is in love with that person, or that is truly their caretaker. And so they will just completely shut down and not speak to us. But please, if there is ever a safety issue or a threat, you do not want to engage personally. You want to call 911.
All right. So we have my buddy Raul just put out the Polaris Project, the resources out there. Thank you. Yeah. So yes, I-95, all the interstates, all the, it makes sense, that kind of stuff. And maybe.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, we've been following, murders along those interstates, and they need to start concentrating on this. It just never seems to get any attention. And I just want to know why.
Yeah.
Is it like the dirty little secret that nobody wants to talk about? Is that what the problem is? I don't know what the problem is, because you figured this would be big news.
I know it's, it is a very dark topic, and some people are saying, no, I can't hear it. They just cover their ears. They bury their heads in the sand. And again, it is a very, very hidden crime. It's literally happening under our noses. But if we are not privy to what to look for, it's going to continue to remain in that very clandestine type of cloaked manner.
Somebody asked, so Mrs. Kelly asks here, says, if we talk to a DA and the DA's office won't help, what do they do? Right. So, I mean, we know that we're having a big problem with some cities with the district attorneys not wanting to do anything in prosecution cases.
I know it's very difficult. And I will say that I know some of the ones in New York, amazing. So I'm not going to speak poorly.
Well, some are and some aren't. I mean, just like every other walk of life between politicians, cops, doctors, good and bad. I mean, it is what it is. So we can't be picking and choosing on which one we don't like today.
No, listen, I know. And you know what? It is just imperative that people are properly informed, people are properly educated. And again, this is all walks of life that crosses all disciplines. There are, again, look at us as healthcare professionals, that we have this massive intersection of human trafficking in healthcare, and we are not properly educated. It filters down again into law enforcement, into the judicial system. And so really just raising awareness, speaking to your elected congressional leaders. They need to be informed. There are a lot of bills that are on the table right now with this session of Congress that need to be passed. There's COSA, there's COPPA, there's the Earn It Act, really trying to put safeguards in place. It's kind of like how we have seatbelts for cars. We need to put a seatbelt on the internet, because these digital platforms, these gaming apps, social media apps, they are mass producing victims at a scale that we just cannot manage. And there are this huge increase in sextortion cases that are specifically targeting teenage boys. They think that they're talking to some, peer who's a girl. They sort of get into compromising situations. And in fact, it's actually some of them are actually coming out of Africa. And then as soon as that chat window is closed, or that image is sent, that inappropriate image is sent, all of a sudden they get this, message, hey, send us $1,000 or whatever amount, I'm just making it up, or we're going to share this all over your social media and go to your schools. And and your religious leaders, and these kids feel that they have no way out. And so this is another huge problem. I was going to say, very important tip in the event, please, parents, make yourself aware in the event of anything. NCMEC has something called Take It Down, but please take that phone, do not delete the messages, block that person, and go to law enforcement.
All right, so here we have, I am not T-Pain. He says here, question for Dr. Francine. What can we do for those who was our parents to make sure predators don't have any contact with our kids online? We're kind of touching on that, but I'm just going to throw something out there. Sometimes as parents, you kind of, your kids think that they're going to get in trouble for doing something. And meanwhile, they had nothing to do with it because they were actually being victimized. How can we address that?
Yeah, so that's wonderful. A couple of things, and Joe, I'm definitely going to speak to what you mentioned. Limit the amount of time that children are using their devices. 1. 2, make sure that they are not using them where they are unsupervised. Like my kids, they call me the Gestapo, but what can I tell you? I'm just gonna crack the whip because they're my kids and they're my phones. I got them for you. But phones stay in my room at night to charge every night. I mean, I have 18-year-olds at this point, so they've been hearing it for many, many years, so they know. So again, find out what they're doing. You need to engage in conversations. You also have to have those open lines of communication, non-judgmental, Joe. So speaking to what you just spoke of, we have to really have this very trusting milieu where our kids can come to us, and as opposed to attacking them and being like, how could you? Why did you do that? Say, okay, let's talk about it. What exactly happened? Because again, they are going to be fearful to come to you because they feel that the repercussions may be as serious as those that they're facing with this predator. So again, open lines of communication, non-judgmental, knowing, okay, we'll work through this. It's not your fault. The prefrontal cortex, which really is our reasoning center of our brain, is not fully developed until we're in our 20s. And so you have these kids, they're hormonal, they're impulsive. They think, ooh, this is cool. Ooh, this is fun. Who is this? Not really recognizing the risks and the dangers and the ramifications of their actions. So again, it truly is not their fault. So just having those conversations with them, educating them, knowing their online presence. I mean, upward of 60 to 70% of parents report they don't know their children's online presence. That is a problem because there are an infinite number of predators out there. They're catfishing, they're posing as peers, thinking, and they're disguising their voices on these gaming apps. So here you're thinking that you're playing with a fellow 12-year-old or 13-year-old. In the meantime, it's some 40-year-old pedophile. And, so I hope that answers your questions. And again, just Joe, touching back on what you had spoken of.
No, and it just doesn't happen to kids. I mean, I've gotten emails in the past saying that we have, pictures of you, and if you don't send me 3 Bitcoin, we're going to post them all over the place. Yes. I mean, and not to make light of it, but I always respond back to it and I say, give me 1 Bitcoin and I'll give you as many pictures as you want, right? And I never hear back from them. But as a 55-year-old, right, I could get away with this stuff. But think about some kid who might have shared a photo, right? And now all of a sudden they go, holy cow, right? So we need to also talk to the kids about not sharing photos about some of these things. And as a parent, it would probably be very difficult to have that conversation. But however way you have to figure it out, I think that's the suggestion, right? Remember, this isn't advice, people. These are suggestions, right?
And
so
just another
do your own thing.
I was going to say another little tidbit. It takes 17 minutes to convince a child to send an inappropriate picture of themselves.
Yeah, like I said, unfortunately, we've seen adults get caught up in this too, not just kids. Right? Well, whether it is for ex-boyfriends and girlfriends, and all of a sudden and we have to have laws against it, right? These revenge laws. So it's just. So think about this. Adults are falling for this. Can you imagine what could happen to a 12-year-old? I mean, that's the way we have to look at it.
Yeah. I mean, there's, that pig butchering and all this stuff going on with these romance scams. and they'll take their time. They'll wait years, 6 months, 2 years. Yeah. It is a very, very organized, highly functioning criminal enterprise that we are dealing with when it comes to exploitation, trafficking, extortion.
Well, we all learned a lot today, Doc. Is there anything that I didn't cover that you wanted to get in there? I mean, we have the website for the Nurses Against Human Trafficking, and the code if you want to take a course at a discount, Sarge 2023. It's up there. Is there anything that we forgot that you wanted to mention today?
I know, just, please, if this has piqued your interest, please, I encourage you to either go to the Blue Campaign, Department of Homeland Security's Blue Campaign, check out Polaris. There are a lot of different organizations that are doing wonderful work. Please know that 50% of the revenue generated for Nurses United Against Human Trafficking is actually donated to a 501c3 where they provide direct victim services. So not only are you becoming educated, but you are actually helping to support survivors of human trafficking and sexual assault. So please jump on our website. It's www.nuaht.org. You can find out more about me, my co-founders, some of our educators, some of the legislative initiatives that we are supporting that's before Congress now. There are links there that you can actually take action. Fill out your contact information and your local elected official will get that notification. Become a member, become educated, equipped, and empowered with Nurses United. And again, please, it's not just for healthcare professionals. It's for educators. It's for guidance counselors. It's for members of law enforcement. Again, we have that, that module. Please take advantage of the 25% discount. And if anyone is, has questions or wishes to pursue this further, please, I am so readily available to be contacted. Just go through our website. There's a little tab up at the top. I think it's like the very last tab, contact us or reach us, or however I have it phrased. I don't remember. And I'm happy to engage in further conversations. If you want some sort of training that may be in person or a Q&A session, so happy to help.
Well, and we'd love to have you back on at a future date, especially if something else comes up, and we'll love to have you back on. I also want to thank Raul because he's been putting up, every time you mention a website, he's been putting it up there. So he has the Blue Campaign, the videos, and he put out those Nick Mick. He put out that link. So all the links that you have, guys, that Francine has talked about today, they're in the chat. And if you need something, just let me know, and I'll put them in the show notes. But listen, Doc, thanks for your time. It was very enlightening. And we hope that, a couple of us have a little more education on this. And if we see something, we'll say something, right? I know it's a hackneyed expression, but you know what? It works.
Yes.
So just want another thank you, a shout out to all the mods here on YouTube and Kick. I appreciate it. You guys, Doc, you have a great holiday. Happy New Year. And we'll talk to you soon. And everybody else, have a good day. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., Joe Scott Morgan, former working at the corner of Jefferson Parish in New Orleans, will be on tomorrow at 2 p.m. Hopefully we'll see you then. Guys, have a great day. Enjoy it. Stay safe.
Thanks, Joe. Bye.
Bye.